Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Ocean Rockstars podcast. Today, I have my lovely guest, Jennifer Leone. Jennifer has had a lot of experience both on the clinical side and on the business side in addiction recovery and sobriety. Today, she's here to share her experience, her personal journey, and ultimately, we're just going to have a dialogue to go over mental health, addiction, and sobriety. Welcome on the show, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. I love recovering out loud, so I'm happy to be here.
Right, and that's, recovering out loud, that's something that I've seen on your own podcast and in your own social media. Can you tell me a little bit more about Recover Out Loud and what that means?
Yeah, so for me, I got sober almost 8 years ago, and when I got sober, I was terrified. I didn't know anybody in recovery. I didn't hang out with drug addicts in my addiction. I didn't know what treatment was. And so it was like this daunting, unfamiliar space. And so for me, through my process of getting sober, working on myself, working in recovery, I've really taken on the approach of recovering out loud for either those that are suffering in silence, but to also show people that are in recovery, early recovery, that, hey, you know what? Like, there's lots of us out here. We're having fun. Life can be good. It can honestly be beyond your wildest dreams if you allow it to be.
Right.
So I just love to show people that lifestyle of what is possible in recovery.
No, that's great to hear. I mean, I think there's so much stigma surrounded with mental health and addiction. And then even people in recovery, there's a lot of anonymity, and there's reason for that. But, it's nice to have another look at it as well, as far as there are people who want to share their story and really be an inspiration to others. And I think you're one of those people.
Thank you.
So that really resonates with me and kind of what we're doing here, which is really promoting to bring awareness, raise education, and really reduce stigma surrounding mental health and addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of my mission as well, because the stigmas need to go.
Right.
We are long past that day and age, I would like to think, of these stigmas. And, with fentanyl and different things that are happening now, people are dropping like flies, and we need to be out there, like you said, having a voice, providing resources, awareness, education, to not just the addict, but the loved ones as well. So many people have this stigma of like what a drug addict looks like, or what someone with mental health looks like, that they're wandering the streets or just under a bridge with a needle in their arm.
Right.
And that's not what it's like anymore, right? It's happening to everyday people, and it's going to knock on your door one way or another, whether it's you or a loved one. And we need to show people like that's not how it is. It doesn't discriminate. And then also where we can go to in our lives, the then and now. It's like when you see people in recovery, where they were and who they are today, if they put in the work, it's so remarkable. And we need to break that stigma and show people like, hey, look at the life you can have.
Right. I mean, just show them that there's hope, and kind of what it looks like if you do the work and if you put in the work.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this disease doesn't discriminate, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've seen that too in our program. We have clients in the young adults, 18 to 26 to 30, who are still living with their family, but they're dealing with addiction. We have people that are, homeless or coming off the streets in certain of our programs. We have people who are in their 40s, 50s, who are professionals, who are successful, and they're still dealing with mental health or addiction. Yeah. And so it doesn't really matter who you are. There's this commonality of, there's suffering, right? And that suffering could be mental health, it could be addiction, it could be sometimes both, right? So we see a lot of dual diagnosis, but it's really one of those things where it's not that image that you've seen in Hollywood of the person, who is dealing with it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So to touch on that a little bit more, you mentioned, people are dropping like flies, right? And I mean, I've seen that, you've seen that, we see it on the news. I'm sure you've, people that are close to you, I've had people close to me. For the families out there that are dealing with loss and grief, can you touch a little bit on how you've dealt with that in dealing with people that you have lost?
Yeah, I mean, for me on a personal level, working in recovery, in the recovery space, we have to really have that balance. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to be doing the work ourselves, outside resources, therapy. Working in recovery cannot be our recovery.
Right.
And so you really need to be able to separate that, especially when we do have these losses. Working in treatment, there's a high rate of burnout. They say like 8 months, for someone that's not equipped and shouldn't be doing it yet, they'll usually burn out. And then if you add loss into that, it's much greater, and can also even be triggering for people, working in recovery that are in early recovery to then go out and use as well. So you really got to understand that space for yourself and what that looks like. And, for personal loss, what I've done is, anytime I've lost somebody, number one, I go talk to somebody about it, make sure that I'm not stuffing everything down and getting those appropriate feelings out, feeling the feelings, which I didn't want to do for a very long time. But now I embrace it. But then also put meaning to their life by continuing the work that I do. And for family and loved ones, I always say, be gentle on yourself, allow the process of whatever you're going to feel. Understand that grief has many layers, go to a support group, go to Al-Anon, go, do your therapy, do your work yourself, because it is a family disease and it affects everybody, especially with the loss.
Yeah, no, that's so true. It's just one of those things, everyone can handle it differently, but at the end of the day, you don't want to keep it inside because that's just going to make things worse. Yeah. And I think that's the best advice, is the first step you take is talk to somebody about it, right?
Yeah.
And then see where that goes. You mentioned earlier that when you first got into learning about the treatment space and you had to go to treatment, you had to work on your own recovery, you were not the kind of person who was surrounded by addicts, and that wasn't really kind of your lifestyle. So maybe if you could share a little bit more about kind of your journey and what you went through and what ultimately got you sober.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. So I'm not from here. My childhood, there was abuse. So I was molested by a family member throughout my childhood, which led me down the road of addiction. So I started numbing myself at 12 years old, anything that I could take, that I could do to not feel these uncomfortable feelings, and just surrounding that, because I kept it a secret for a long time, not being able to trust people, who loves me, who doesn't, just, it was a mess because it was all within the family. So then I finally I did come out and say what was going on and ask for help in that. And I didn't really get the response that I was looking for, so I ended up just kind of running away from home and getting into a lot of trouble, running with the wrong kids and things like that at a very young age. And like I said, just doing any sort of drugs, alcohol that I could. And that eventually brought me to California. So at 19, I had landed a TV show out here because I was trying to model and act back in Vancouver. And I packed a suitcase and got on a flight and came to Los Angeles. Yeah. Didn't know anybody, just an agent, and was working on this TV show, and just brought my addiction with me. Okay. And at that point, I didn't know that I had this addiction. I just knew that I was trying to escape this pain that was very confusing and uncomfortable. And I was just also young and having fun. Right. And that went on for a very long time. So I would pop a lot of pills. At first I was all prescribed by a doctor. Okay. So that, included Adderall, Xanax, pain medication. And, I would build up a tolerance, and I'd have to go back, and they'd have to raise the dose and raise the dose and raise the dose. And no one ever said, hey, you're going to get addicted to these. Maybe this is too much. Maybe this is too much. That was never the conversation with the doctor. And I didn't tell anybody what was going on. Right. And so here I am, up in Hollywood, have nice things, have a house, have a nice car, all these things. And I think, well, it's fine. I've got it all under control. Right. And then one day I just thought, I'm just going to stop all these pills. And I ended up in the hospital because I was insanely sick. I didn't even know. Going through withdrawals. I didn't even know withdrawal would happen. Right. You didn't even know it was. I didn't even know. Yeah. I'm in my early 20s. I had no idea. And I remember sitting in my house and thinking, well, wow, I can't let that happen again. I have work and, friends and all. I guess I'm just going to take these pills for the rest of my life. Right. And so at that point I found a dealer on the outside where I would meet him once a week, pick up, my supply, and then I would get my doctor's prescriptions, and just completely locked into that lifestyle, a prisoner to that for sure.
You didn't see that there was an alternative. You thought, okay, this is the only way I can.
The only way. Right. Yeah. I honestly didn't even know what treatment was or anything at that time. And, you know, it just progressively got worse. As I got older, I became anorexic. I lost my gallbladder. You know, I would go on these 5150 holds because I'd go into psychosis from the Adderall and not sleeping for a week. But even then it was just, oh, Jenny's sick. She's in the hospital. You know, she's got a kidney infection or something like that. Like nobody really knew.
Just kind of brush it under the rug.
Brush it under the rug and just keep living that lifestyle that I was living. And it wasn't until I started drinking, of course, my brain that's trying to kill me told me like, hey, just start drinking and then you'll stop taking all these pills. And so that's what I did for like the last 3 years in my addiction. I started drinking heavily, trying to get off the pills. But what happened, which is a silver lining looking back, blessing in disguise, was that I got extremely sloppy. So here I am just, you know, having blackouts, waking up in bad situations, people I don't know, and you know, just massive embarrassment and not understanding. And so that was what finally led me to get sober. You know, I had many bottoms. You know, people always ask about bottoms. I had many bottoms. I'd overdose. You know, here I am waking up in a psych ward, you know, strapped down to a table.
Like, how did I get here?
Yeah, and how did I get there? But that was never like a bottom. It was just like, oh, okay. But there was just this quiet moment. I was in my room and I had a gun in one hand and I had my life in another hand. And there was a voice and it just said, Jenny, if you don't get help right now, you're going to die. And I didn't want to die. And so I knew in that moment that I had to ask for help. And up until that point, I viewed asking for help as a weakness. You know, here I am strong in all these other areas of my life. I'm quote unquote successful, you know, and I was dead on the inside though. And so it was having to ask for help. And once I finally told somebody and asked for help, it was like 1,000 pounds got lifted off my shoulders. And come to realize that was the most courageous thing I could do, was to ask for help. And so, yeah, the person asked for help, helped me get into treatment. And it's, you know, it's all downhill from there in a good way. In a good way. Uphill, I should say. It's all uphill from there.
Onward and forwards, right? You know, that's so. First of all, thanks for sharing that. I think that's something that a lot of people can hear, and you know, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, and kind of see, well, look at her now, and you know, there's a path and there's a hope. A couple of things you mentioned. One is, you know, you had achieved these things, right? These material things. You had a house, you had a car, you had kind of a nice lifestyle, but behind the scenes, you were popping these pills, and at first it was prescription. So it's like, oh, this is legal, right? Like, I'm not doing anything illegal. So you kind of convinced yourself that, you know, this is the way. And then you tried to get off, and then you saw that, okay, well, I can't do that. So I think, you know, it's almost like you convinced yourself that the only way to achieve this material success is by continuing to use these coping mechanisms, which were not healthy, but you also didn't have the education or really the support around you to say, hey, look, this isn't, you know, the right way to go. Your doctor wasn't telling you to stop. The people around you, I'm sure, were kind of enjoying the benefits of you being under the influence and things of that nature. And so, but then when you had that moment, you know, I think that's such a, you know, powerful statement, right? When you had that moment where you had your life in one hand and kind of the thought process of ending it in the other hand, you made the decision to live, right? And then that was when you said, okay, well, these material things and kind of this image of myself is not important, but who I am inside and, you know, who I want to be is important, right? And so really, I think that was the, you know, for a lot of people listening, I think that's the choice that we make sometimes is, do I choose this image of myself of who I want people to think I am or who people think I am, versus really working on what's broken inside and dealing with how tough that is. And so tell us a little bit about that journey. Now that you've made that decision, I'm going to get help, I'm going to go to treatment. Really the biggest thing that you said is asking for help, right? This kind of concept of surrendering and saying, look, I'm not going to solve this problem by myself. I need other people to help me. So then what did you do after that? Like, as far as like action steps?
So I went to treatment, and while I was in treatment, I was sitting in residential. I'd gone through detox, and I just had this like aha moment where I thought, okay, what am I going to do with my life now? Because my life as I knew it was over, you know, because I lived this lifestyle. I hung out with these people. That's all I'd ever known. I've never worked a normal job in my life. And I had to completely change everything about me if I was going to be successful in my recovery. And that lifestyle, that was a false sense of reality. You know, like none of that was real. You know, who I was underneath it all, like that's who I was and who I wanted to find and become. So I was sitting there and I was thinking, you know what, the only way any of this is going to make sense, and the only way I'm going to be able to turn all these horrible things that have happened to me into something positive, is to help other people. I just knew with every fiber in me, like that's what I needed to do. So I enrolled myself back in school for drug and alcohol studies. And so I went back to school full time. And for anybody out there that thinks they're not going to do well in school, I'm telling you, if I can do it, you can do it. Because I didn't do well in school growing up. And that's because I didn't care. I didn't apply myself. I was doing drugs, hanging out with the wrong kids. And when I went back to school and it's actually something I enjoyed, then I was a straight A student. Like I always say, chase your passion and your purpose in recovery, because it's one thing to get sober, but if we don't find something that sets our soul on fire, whatever that may be, we're going to be miserable. We're going to be miserable. And a lot of times end up relapsing again because you have no fulfillment in your life. So for me, it was exploring that purpose and passion, working in recovery, and then also doing, you know, the work I needed to do on myself. And that was joining the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I worked that rigorously for the first 2 years with a sponsor, going to meetings pretty much every day. And then after that, you know, I still went, but just not as much. I know some people don't like to hear that, but for me, it worked for me because I also had other things that I was doing. I was seeing a therapist on a regular basis, doing different things like EMDR, all sorts of stuff with my therapist. I was really following a spiritual path with Buddhism and, you know, meditation, prayer, and just really like exploring all of that and what that looked like and getting mentors. So for me, when I first got sober, I looked at people that were in recovery or just doing really well in life, that were truly happy, and seeked them out. Like one of the people that came and spoke at the school that I was going to, shout out to Doug Hellman. He's the director over at, oh my goodness, why am I blind? I just totally blanked. We can cut this out.
We'll Google it.
What am I'm totally blanking where he works
Doug
right
Hellman.
now. Huh?
You can just say his name.
Isn't it Doug Hellman? That's so weird though, because I'm literally there like once a month. It's just going to come back to me suddenly. But yeah, shout out to Doug Hellman, because he came in, he was talking about his program. And afterwards I was like, hey, I need to know you. I can tell you're an amazing man. I started working in their kitchen at their facility, volunteering, and he's still one of my mentors today. And it's like 8 years later.
Wow.
So
That's
just really
awesome.
seeking out those people that could be influential in your life. Orange County Rescue Mission. There we go.
There you
That's
go.
the spot.
Orange County Rescue Mission.
But it was, you know, collaborating all these different things I needed to do in my life. My wellness, you know, taking care of myself physically, working a program of Alcoholics Anonymous, seeing the therapist, and following what I was passionate about. You know, those were the key things. And honestly, like, it's a slow journey. Like, this is a one day at a time journey that takes a long time. Like, I used and drank for 20 years. It wasn't like I was just going to get sober and within 6 months, my whole life be better and be turned around, right? So we have to really be gentle on ourselves through that process. Like I say, the first 5 years were tough. You know, these last 2 years, I feel very solid, not overconfident, but solid in my recovery.
You've got your routine.
Yeah, and there's a couple things that really shifted that were monumental, and that was going from a victim to a survivor state of mind, which is a game changer. Taking on the why not me mentality. You know, I would always look at other people and their success, whatever it is in their life, whether it's their, you know, their married, kids, white picket fence, or a career. And I'd be like, oh, maybe for you, but not for me. And that's what I'd do. I'd go sit in a meeting and I'd be like, maybe for you, not for me. And switching that mindset of, well, why not me? You know, here I am, I'm sober, I should be dead. I'm here for a reason. I have this superpower. Why not me? I can do anything I want. So switching that mindset and then truly finding forgiveness. You know, being able to turn all that over to my higher power and not hold on to it anymore. Not realizing that those people that had hurt me, they were still controlling my life years and years and years later.
Right.
So those were the key things for me in my recovery.
No, that's great to hear. I think, you hit so many, I feel like there were so many nuggets of information there, right? Like for me, the things that resonated with me is, I'll kind of go backwards, but you said forgiveness, such an important and powerful word. But I think it's a combination of forgiving others and also at the end of the day, forgiving yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? Because have all these, in the beginning, right? You're thinking, well, I wasted all these years and I wasted all this time and, I could have done all this. And that's the victim mentality, which is, it's not a negative thing. It's just, that's kind of the initial phase of recovery. And then once you get further along and you get more tools and more time under your belt, then you kind of switch that mindset to the survivor mentality, right? Which is, I made it, and like, look at me now. And then you start kind of passing that on to others. That's something you can pay forward, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you mentioned, so many interesting things, but I think during your journey and during your process, that it wasn't overnight, it's this thing that and it's such a common thing that I've seen with people that have addiction or mental health issues that are looking for a fix. Like, I need to fix this problem. I need to stop drinking or doing drugs, or I need to, deal with my mental health, is that they want the overnight, pill, like that pill that's going to fix you overnight.
If you find it, let me know where that is.
We'll license it. Right. But no, so it's not a pill, and it's also not, there's no tools that can fix this overnight. Right. It's just a matter of that daily effort. And then I think what you did, which I really advocate and we advocate here, is there's no one size fits all approach. And it's not like, hey, just go to meetings or just do this or just do therapy, right? It's that combination, like comprehensive strategy, holistic strategy, where you did therapy, you did EMDR, you're going to meetings, you're, actively engaging and helping others. And I think the number one thing is actively engaging in helping others, because that in and of itself is such a selfless act.
Yes.
And you're not thinking about, because a lot of this stuff is like, it's such a narcissistic problem, right? Like, you're thinking about yourself, even if it's your own problems.
Yeah.
Like, I have to solve my problems, I have to fix my problems. And then you shift that focus on helping somebody else. You're like, I forgot about myself for a second, right?
Exactly.
But then that's where you're like earlier, well, that's where the burnout comes in. Because now, and we see that a lot, is, okay, people really dive in and it's like, okay, I'm going to just help others. And then now you're getting all their stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, wait a second, I need to focus on myself again. So, the key word that I always use is balance.
Yes.
But it takes time to find that balance, because it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
And so for you, it seems like it took 5-7 years to finally, while you're sober and while you're, if other people look at you, hey, you're 1 year sober, I wish I could be 1 year sober, right? So even though in your mind you haven't gotten where you want to be, someone else looking at you is like, hey, even at 1 year, I would love to be 1 year sober, right? And then 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And it's not just about the time, but it's how you shifted mentally, right? So, I just love hearing that. And I think that's something that, anyone who's watching, whether you're going through it yourself or if you're a family member, and I think a lot of this, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about family, is they don't understand what the addict or the person dealing with mental health disease is suffering, because they either are not aware of like what's actually happening, or because they are in denial, right? And they don't want to hear that truth because you're their parent, and that means you did something wrong, right? So let's kind of go back and forward a little bit on, you mentioned earlier that when you went through some traumatic, really traumatic things in your childhood, and at first you were hiding it, right? And that's very common. We see, people hiding it. And the reason you were hiding it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were afraid of what people would think of you or if they would judge you. And you're just so young. You're just so young that.
Yeah, very young.
So that's just so common. And it's, but then when you decided and you had the courage to speak up about it, you didn't hear what you were expecting, right? You were expecting, okay, well, let's remove this problem and let's fix this. And I don't know what you, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, but it a lot of times what people hear is just either denial or no, you're just making it up, or just making you feel even worse, right? And so that's when you have to leave the environment. And so that's something we see a lot is, you know, ultimately our goal is to work with families and work with the system. And that's the ultimate goal. But sometimes in the beginning, it's hard to do that because there's such a distrust and such a fracture in that relationship that everyone needs to kind of separate, but both sides need to work on themselves. So I'd like to hear from your perspective on what it takes, both through your journey, and I don't know if you ever kind of got back to healing with the family, but also in your professional experience, dealing with addiction and dealing with families. What are some suggestions or tools and tips that you can share that can hopefully, you know, fast forward some of that process where we can get to healing quicker?
Yeah. Well, one thing with families I find is that they need to allow this process of like truly listening and letting people be heard.
Right.
I feel like people want to talk, well, me, right? And there's not a lot of I feel statements. You know, I feel upset because of this. It's you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. And it's hard to get away from the, well, why can't you just change? Why can't you just be different? And to understand that every person, no matter if it's your son, daughter, husband, wife, we're all on our own personal journeys. And that nothing we're doing you should take personally. And that's so hard to really apply that because we want to take all those things personally, especially like you're saying with parents, there's a lot of guilt. You know, with my mom, when I started recovering out loud and talking about my journey, she was calling me going, do we need to talk? Is everything okay? Because she, of course, started feeling like, oh my God, this is all my fault again. What could I have done differently? And honestly, there's nothing that she could have done differently. And we've done our work together and everything's okay. I'm just talking about it now. But just not personalizing things and really truly listening to the other person. Allow them a space to feel safe and heard, and that you're not just going to immediately try to offer a solution. That's a big one too. You know, not always does the person come to you wanting you to give them the answers. They're coming to you because they trust you and they feel safe with you and they want to have a conversation.
Right.
Allow them to come to you, have that conversation. Allow them to ask you for some help or some resources, you know, and not just feel like, okay, I'm going to solve this and, you know, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. Because for someone, especially in active addiction, that can be very overwhelming. And you got to, you know, work up to these things. So that would be some of my suggestions. Yeah.
No, I love that. And I think that that's something that applies even more broadly when you said to build that trusting environment. And more specifically, when you said sometimes like as the child, you come to the parent and you want to share something and you don't want advice. You don't want to be judged. And you just want to be able to share something. And the reason a lot of kids don't share is because the parents either they're worried that the parents are judging them, like, oh, okay, what's wrong with you or whatever, or and this is more more of an innocent issue, is that like the first thing the parent does is like, okay, well, here's some advice, right? Like this is what you need to do. And you know, I've even dealt with this with my kids. I mean, my kids are young; they're all under 10, and they don't have any issues. But right now, and they're all, you know, just dealing with just normal school stuff. But sometimes you kind of see them; they come home and they're usually super happy, and then sometimes they're a little bit sad, or you can tell something when goes on. And so at first, kind of my question is like, well, what happened, right? And then they kind of like hesitate, like they're not even thinking about. Yeah, we have a great relationship. We talk all the time. We're hanging out all the time. I spend a lot of time with them. But initially, there's this, like, I don't really want to share, you know? And so you need to, as a parent, in my opinion, and this is through my experience, but also learning from what we do, is you need to build those building blocks and those foundations for trust and for sharing with just the little things. Just like, how was your day at school, but not, you know, oh, okay, well, this kid bothered you, we got to go do something about it, right? Or, oh, okay, this person said, so if every time they share something, it's so little with you that you feel like, okay, now we got to go talk to this guy's parents, or we got to talk to the school, or then they might not want that, right? And maybe at some point it does need to get to that. But a lot of times, in my opinion, it's create an environment where they feel comfortable, and really just tell them, like, to me, what works is being really explicit and just saying, hey, look, like, I'm not here to judge what you're saying. I even tell them before, I'm like, I'm not going to give you any advice. Like, I just want to hear what happened, you know? And then they share, and then you actually have to stick to your word, and like, not you resist the temptation to step in.
Yeah, and if you can do that several times and be consistent, then that's where the magic happens. Because then they go, okay, they're really not going to do this.
Right, and then they can actually like come to you with the more, with the bigger issues. And so to me, I think that's, based on Jenny's experience, based on a lot of experiences we hear, and just based on my own experience as a parent, I think, it's not even about when it gets to the addiction and the mental health and these big things that we need to fix. It's how do you just raise kids in a way where you build the trust and you build a supportive environment where they feel comfortable, right? And then once you do that, then kind of the channel's open. And then if they are going through something where some stranger or even a family member does something inappropriate, they're going to come tell you right away. Rather than if you have not created that environment, then they're going to keep that with inside. So, I think it's telling your kids those things like, hey, if anybody touches you or if anybody does something, and just having that constant dialogue, even about some things that are kind of uncomfortable. Because I feel like a lot of people don't talk about that stuff because they think, well, why would we talk about these issues, right? Like, that's not going to affect my family. Who knows? They might be at a camp. They might be, they might be their instructor. It might be someone at school. In this case, it could be a close family member. You can't take any of that for granted, I think another important thing, going off of what you're saying, you can start young, is parents, at no fault of the parent, I do it myself, but we always want to keep it together. Right. We're really strong. We don't show them when we're upset, our emotions. I mean, I'll speak for myself at least. I want to make sure he thinks everything is fine, everything's good. But I think like having those conversations with our kids, my son is now almost 16, and we've gotten to the point where I can be very open and honest with him. And he sees that, okay, my mom isn't having a good day. Right. Something has upset her. She's sad, but she got through it, and this is how. And it shows him, using my situation, that it's okay for him to show those emotions too. But I think when parents stuff and just put up this, exterior of everything's fine, then the child will want to mirror that and mimic that over years subconsciously, like, okay, no, everything's fine. Right. No, 100%. I think that, by doing that, what you're saying, and showing your vulnerability, at the same time, you have to show your strength. So I think that's, again, that balance that I talked about is, you don't want your kids to be just always complaining or just always, just sad all the time or just always, talking negatively. But at the same time, that's different than sharing what's going on, right? And I think a lot of people confuse those things. They say, well, if I talk to my kids about, hey, we're struggling at home or we're dealing with this issue, they're going to all of a sudden lose confidence. But that's not true. They don't, that you're still their parent. Frankly, being honest and transparent with them is going to ultimately be a better relationship, right? Just having that vulnerability, but also having the strength at the same time. Because a lot of times, that's just the human nature, right? Because later, if they go on and they think, okay, well, the only way to survive is by keeping it inside, then they're going to go through all these problems and they don't know who to talk to until it's too late. So I love the fact that you do that. And, I think everyone who's listening, really, that's one advice that I have. And I think, we've gone through just so many people and talked to so many families, is that, you need to have a dialogue with your kids, and it doesn't always have to be positive, right? But at the end of the day, it needs to be positive. So even if you're going through something tough, you share that, but then you say, okay, well, this is what we're doing, we're working hard, we're whatever it is, right? Like we're taking these steps, because that's okay, well, this is our current issue, but then this is the outcome. Like you always want to have a positive outlook. And I think that's something you mentioned earlier is, you changed the mindset, and now you're thinking about, well, why not me? Right? And now you're thinking about you're worthy and you're able to do all these things for yourself. And there's no reason why you shouldn't have it and some other woman or man should have it, right? So I think that's so huge. I think just the way to think. And it's so interesting, right? Because it's the same brain, right? The same brain you had before is the same brain you have now, but you're using it differently. And your whole perspective has changed, right?
Yeah. It just goes to show you how much you can change in recovery.
And how much power you have in your own life, right? All right. Well, I love hearing all that. I think we've hit a lot of the topics. Ultimately, I think this is an opportunity for families to kind of look inside themselves and say, hey, look, are there anything in our house, whether you have young adults, teens, these days things start so early in age because of all the social media and all the different things that, there's really no time that's too early to talk about your kids about these topics. And I think the kids are smart enough that the more information you share with them, and as long as you do it in a kind of a positive way, they're going to be better for it. It's not about hiding these issues. It's about talking about these issues.
Yeah, and especially with social media now, everything they can see online, they are way smarter than we give them credit for.
Right,
That's for sure.
All right, well, thank you for coming on the show. It was
Thanks
lovely
for
to have
me.
you. Again, we had a great episode with Jennifer Leone, talked about issues like family, her own personal recovery, her journey, hope, change, and ultimately that mindset. I think really I loved hearing that, going from victim mindset to survivor mindset. And she's a great example and a great testimonial of somebody who has gone through all the challenges and is now in such a positive space where she's helping others, and whilst doing that, helping herself. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.